All right. Hello, hello. So we are joined here today by Agent Kee Mathews. How are you doing today, Agent Key?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Well, thank you for being with us here today. I know there's a lot going on in the housing market that people could probably use some help navigating. There's this very complex market at this time, and out here in the Sacramento area, I keep seeing articles every day that it's heating up and people are coming in droves. So hopefully you can help us understand the context of that a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we get started, because we are a news program, we're just gonna show a little video about what's been going on in the news over the last week or so.
Biden to withdraw all combat troops from Afghanistan by September 11th. President Biden will withdraw American combat troops from Afghanistan, declaring to end to the nation's longest war and overruling warnings from his military advisors that the departure could prompt a resurgence of the same terrorist threats that sent hundreds of thousands of troops into combat over the past 20 years.
China defends handling of rocket that fell to Earth. China's government defended its handling of a rocket booster that burned up over the Indian Ocean and said Monday it was unfairly being held to different standards than U.S. and other space programs.
But, something that is in the news. Sixth grade girl shoots 3 at Idaho middle school. A sixth grade girl shot 2 students and a custodian at an Idaho middle school on Thursday before being disarmed by a teacher, authorities said. The Jefferson County Sheriff Steve Anderson said the girl had fired multiple rounds inside and outside Rigby Middle School in the small city of Rigby, about 95 miles southwest of Yellowstone National Park, to survive.
South Carolina House adds firing squad to execution methods. The South Carolina House voted Wednesday, May 5th, to add a firing squad to the state's execution methods amid a lack of lethal injection drugs. A measurement to jumpstart executions in the state that once had the busiest death chambers in the nation. The bill, S-176, approved by 643 vote, will require condemned inmates to choose either being shot or electrocuted if lethal injection drugs aren't available.
Yeah, South Carolina definitely got some racism, white supremacy going on there. Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of the South, looks like Keisha Lance Bottoms is not going to be running for mayor again in Atlanta. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, at a Friday morning press conference at Atlanta City Hall, explained her surprise decision not to seek re-election as the city's mayor in the city.
Sounds kind of sus. Disney goes woke with new anti-racist agenda for employees. Disney is pushing critical race theory on employees through a new plan called Reimagine Tomorrow, urging workers to recognize their white privilege in a battery of training modules on topics such as systemic racism and white fragility, according to internal documents obtained by City Journal's Christopher Rufo.
Because I'd have just flipped all the words around.
Well, thank you. Well, we should all, be well versed on our CRT.
Most definitely. All right, so let's see what this is. COVID-19 vaccine shots. Well, it looks like, ladies and gentlemen, there are some Americans, actually a significant number of Americans, are reluctant to get the COVID-19 vaccine shot. So let's see what this article says. So few people came for COVID-19 vaccinations in one county in North Carolina that hospitals there now allow anyone 16 or older to get a shot, regardless of where they live. Get a shot, get a free donut, the governor said.
Okay. California's population has fallen for the first time in history. California lost 182,000 people in 2020, marking the first population decline ever recorded in state and underscoring larger trends that recently led to the loss of a congressional seat.
All right, so some AB 3121 news. It looks like Governor Gavin Newsom has appointed 5 members to study reparations for Black Americans. Governor Gavin Newsom appointed 5 members to a task force Friday to study how California should make amends or for the oppression of Black Americans. Within, I don't know, a couple of months, because they got to do it soon since the other, appointments have been made. So hopefully the State Assembly will be making those public. So I think, Kim, we should probably, definitely schedule a time. I think we do have a show that we're going to do about AB 3121 specifically in the updates and actually go through the whole bill. Yep.
Yes, definitely need to familiarize ourselves with everything, all the T's that are crossed, all the I's that are dotted in this bill, so we can follow along. I'm looking forward to these recommendations. Finally, some good news in the news.
Definitely. So that's in the news.
So, wow, Kee, were you aware of everything going on in the news in the last few days?
Most of that. So I'm glad that I was aware of most of that.
Yeah, when I saw the breaking news that the rocket was barreling towards Earth, I thought it was the end. I was watching that pretty closely, and then when it fell in the ocean, it's like,
yeah, you got to be careful. They try to get you with those headlines. Yeah, they've been anticipating that for a long time, and the closer it got, the more drastic and dramatic the headlines got. But they knew where it was going to land. They knew.
Okay, yeah, they sure didn't let you know that from the headlines. They had us on the edge of our seat. Okay, well, let's get into it. Since we're talking about housing today, I think it's appropriate that we talk about, how we got here, where it started. Let's see. Black land loss in the United States. Black land loss in the United States refers to the loss of land ownership and rights by Black people residing or farming in the United States. In 1862, the United States government passed the Homestead Act, which was intended to give land grants to Americans seeking land to farm. As slavery was not abolished until in the United States until 1865, many enslaved and free Blacks were unable to benefit from these acts until the end of the war in 1865 and the passage of the 14th Amendment in 1866. According to data published by National Park Service, the University of Nebraska, some 6,000 homesteads on average of 160 1/4 section, 1/4 square mile, were issued to Blacks in the years immediately following the war. Now, since we're talking about, what's going on in current times with housing bubbles and such, it almost seems like, all the people that lost their homes almost seems like land loss, land theft. To
Very
me, what's your take on that?
Well, so what you were just was the 40 acres and a mule opportunity. And I'm sorry, I'm getting back as I'm talking, so I'm stopping.
Okay, maybe try turning down your volume a little bit, see if that helps. And I'll mute my mic while you.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So, with the field order 15 and the allocation of the 400,000 acres, you're right. That was like the beginning, the precursor of land being taken and given back. And all of those opportunities just kept occurring and reoccurring throughout U.S. history. The New Deal occurred after that with the proposal of the GI Bill and Social Security. There were so many missed opportunities for the U.S. to do right by us, and they didn't. And it just further impacted and exacerbated the situation to where we are now. And often people will say, well, there are laws in place now. This shouldn't be happening. Why don't Blacks just pick themselves up by their bootstraps and dig in their heels and do what's right? You know, you'll hear people often say, I know a Black person who's doing really well. You know, I have Black friends and they're doing really well. It's just a matter of them picking themselves up by their bootstraps and making it happen. But that's actually it. Because of these, there were policies and laws that were implemented that were it was legal to discriminate. And I think people have a hard time wrapping their minds around that, if that makes sense. When it's legal to discriminate, law becomes the societal norm. Law becomes, this is the way we function. We're then telling our brains that this is what normalcy is. And so when you have 200 years of discrimination being normalized, imagine the mindset of the individual doing the discriminating. Imagine the thought process. Imagine the trauma to the individuals being discriminated against. And so that is what America, that's why we are where we are today, because there is now a realization or an awakening. As we say, we're woke. I think a majority of us are now starting to awaken as a result of COVID, as a result of George Floyd, that this is still happening. Not that it never was, but that it is still happening. And why is it happening? So hopefully we get an opportunity today to dissect, what actually happened, why it's still happening.
And what some of the solutions could be. Now, you mentioned the Homestead Act, you mentioned the GI Bill, you mentioned one more, I thought.
Social Security.
Social Security?
The New Deal.
Oh, the New Deal, yes, the New Deal.
The GI Bill and Social Security falling under the New Deal. That was under the Franklin Roosevelt administration. Mm-hmm.
Okay, the New Deal. And then redlining is another initiative that we're pretty well aware of. A new one that I heard when I was watching the show Them on Primetime. I don't know if you've seen that series.
I have not.
Yeah, but it's really about, and they really touched on covenants, and that was a new one that I hadn't heard. Now, where does that fall into the spectrum of the other discriminatory programs that you just mentioned?
Sure. So the covenants they fall under CCRs, codes, covenants, and restrictions. And so those arose around the time of as we talk about the New Deal. Let's see if I can put it into perspective. So if you think about post-World War II, 1948, the GI Bill. The GI Bill was a guaranteed mortgage. It was created as a piece of legislation aimed at helping World War II vets prosper after the war. And the implementation of that bill actually helped drive growing gaps in wealth, education, and civil rights between Black and white Americans. It was structured in a way where it shut doors ultimately for 1.2 million Black vets who had served their country during World War II in segregated ranks. And so I'm going to get to the point where the CCNRs, the codes, covenants, and restrictions come into play, because at that time.
Before you do that, we just had Chris jump on, so I'm going to let him in, and then we'll let you continue your train of thought.
Awesome. Hey, Chris. Hey, sir. How are you?
What's up? Good to see everybody. Sorry I'm late. Coming off a meeting about reparations.
Reparations. Okay. We're getting a little bit of feedback on your audio, Chris, so maybe if you could turn it down a little bit, and yeah. Okay. Kee, if you could tell us about those CCNRs.
Yeah. So during that time, there was the banks that were also participating in this. The FHA guaranteed bank loans for construction and development to suburban developments such as Levittown, you may have heard of, on condition that they would not sell homes to African Americans. Now keep that in mind. It wasn't until 1968 that Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, which made those practices illegal. So 20 years later, the law was put into place. But prior to that, because it was legal, the FHA is through the federal government. They legalized segregation of selling homes to African Americans. You had individuals like real estate professionals, and specifically realtors. Realtor is a brand. And because the realtors were white, it was a white organization. Shortly after that, the Realtists, REALTIST, came into existence. And that's the Black National Organization of Real Estate Professionals. They came in to implement democracy in housing. And that's their tagline. These realtors were the gatekeepers. So you have homeowners who want to sell their homes or buy homes through realtors, and you have these gatekeepers saying, we're going to help ensure that homes don't get sold to African Americans. So in addition to them being gatekeepers, there were tactics that they employed, such as blockbusting. Blockbusting was scare tactics where they'd say that they'd go into a neighborhood and they'd say that Blacks were coming into the neighborhood. They'd have Blacks dress up. There were actually Blacks that participated in this blockbusting too, where they paid them to dress up and pretend that they lived in a home, which would essentially scare a white neighbor into selling their home so that they could then get the commission on that. And then all of a sudden, this neighborhood would be overrun, run down, because only Blacks were able to move into it, but they got commission on selling those homes. That was blockbusting. The CCNRs happened because legally they could now put in to the covenants, codes, and restrictions that these homes can't be sold to African Americans. There still exist in some CCNRs. First of all, CCNRs you can pull those up on almost every property. Every property has CCNRs. When this information was placed in the CCNRs, you could literally read things that said a Negro is not allowed to move into this neighborhood. If they are caught in this neighborhood after 5 p.m. or something, that they would be fined or imprisoned. They could only come into the neighborhoods if they were working as servants. They had to come through the back door. It was very specific. And this was the law. This was in the CCNRs. Some of this still exists in some of the CCNRs, but oftentimes it's stricken out, but you can still see it where it existed. There was a movement made at one point in California to have that totally removed. I'm not so sure I'm in favor of it being totally removed, because I think we need to see where we came from in order to appreciate where we're going. So based on that show that you've been watching, that's where that comes from. That's that era where that.
Okay, so it sounds like CCNR is or redlining is kind of a watered down version of the CCNR, not as specific.
No, redlining is something else that took place during. So you had blockbusting, you had the discrimination in the CCNRs. Redlining was totally separate. Redlining was where banks would only make loans in certain neighborhoods according to certain categories. And if your neighborhood was categorized in a lower category, then they wouldn't make your loan for your project. And the way that it was mapped out, if you looked at the categories on a map, it was a color-coded map. The red areas were where Blacks lived, a majority. And that's where the term redlining came from. Were not made to individuals, to businesses or developments who were trying to open up or build in those communities.
Okay, so the banks got involved with the redlining, which
The
is
banks were involved. Yes, they were
why they are
spearheading.
culpable.
FHA. Government.
Now, we're all familiar with realtors, but realtors, that's the first I've heard of it. Do realtors still exist? Is
The
this
realtors still
organization still
exist.
around?
I am a realtor. There's the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, NAREB, and so that's on the national level. For the state of each state has their own chapter, and so for California, it's the California Association of Real Estate Brokers, and then locally in Sacramento, we're called the Sacramento Realtists. So you could Google any of that, go to the Sacramento Realtists website. You'll see that they've been in existence since the 60s. I want to say it was the 60s that they were formed. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is it a pretty large group, the realtors?
It's a fairly large group. As a matter of fact, today they had a huge nationwide Zoom conference on housing. So yeah, they're a pretty powerful push as well.
Great. That's great to hear. I certainly will do my research on the realtors, and I love the name also. And while we're talking about real estate diversity, I'll just read this little news blurb here. Real estate has a diversity problem. Will this moment lead to real change? This came out in August of 2020, and according to a study from 2017 by Bella Research Group and Knight Foundation, more than 75% of senior executive jobs in the U.S. commercial real estate industry were held by white men, while only 1.3 were held by Black men. White women held 14.1%, while non-white women held fewer than 1% of senior executive level jobs. When it comes to ownership, only 0.7% of the 889 real estate investment management firms included in the researchers' data set were owned by women, while 2% were owned by minorities. In 2013, when Reggie Samuels started out as an investment management, he attended the National Multifamily Housing Council annual conference and spotted only one or two other Black attendees, but out of crowds of thousands. While he has seen that number grown, it hasn't been by much. I was commonly the only African American in the room, said Samuels, founder and managing director of the Lemus Group, a Virginia-based real estate management firm. 8 years later, when Samuel attempted to launch his own fund, he was feeling confident. He had a ton of experience and a successful track record, having done scores of deals with relatively large investors, but he didn't receive the interest he expected. I was surprised at the limited traction that I was able to garner when trying to raise institutional funds, he said. While he said he was never felt it was overtly discriminated against, he does believe there are systemic problems in the industry.
Yeah.
Now, how does a real estate management firm play into all this?
So, it's interesting because I've been in the industry for 17 years. And initially, when I first started, I had a come to Jesus moment. I initially thought that I had to look a certain way and to appeal to a certain audience in order to get people to work with me, in particular, whites. And I admit this because when I say I had a come to Jesus moment, it was like, no, you need to focus on who's not being served. There was a point in my real estate career where I realized, wait, you can't work in real estate as a Black person and not get hit in the face with all of the injustice. You just can't do it. And I think coming in, I had a misconception about what my purpose was. So if you're going to move forward in this industry as a Black person and you realize and see the injustices, you have to do something. And doing something about it, you've got to be courageous. You've got to be ready to receive some kickback. You've got to be ready to be the only person in the room, like that article you just read that he was. You've got to stand firm. You've got to know your history, and you have to have a vision for moving forward. And so some of the things that, as we talk about reparations and what that looks like and what should happen, definitely there should be incentives offered to developers and organizations who are looking to build more affordable, innovative, eco-friendly homeownership opportunities with sustainable technology. And I say homeownership opportunities over affordable housing is because we've got to be careful. Affordable housing, renting can fall under affordable housing and falls under affordable housing all day long. But renting, we right now as Blacks, we are the largest segment of renters in the United States, and renting does not bring about wealth. We have to be careful not to get pigeoned into that category of renters and to not get excited when we hear the term affordable housing. We need to be thinking about affordable home ownership opportunities because home ownership produces wealth. And why I say with sustainable technology, we saw Hurricane Katrina. Our communities are built with the bottom of the totem pole materials. That's what they were built with. And so when they're impacted environmentally, we get wiped out. So we need to incentivize revitalizing our communities. There need to be, again, incentives offered to developers to do that. Revitalizing our communities that have been redlined and turn them into owner-occupied, self-sustaining, affordable, greener communities. And it feels like a lot and it sounds like a lot, but if we do that, when you take care of the man on the bottom of the totem pole, everybody wins, right? Everybody wins. So that's now my directive regarding real estate and the direction that I'm heading. I've kind of had a little bit of a 360. Yes, I want to help people buy and sell real estate, but even more so, I want to empower those of us who are Blacks and the African American community, say Blacks to cover every end of the spectrum, to make sure that not only do we have the opportunity for home ownership, but that we can get inside of this system as well. We need to be the realtors, we need to be the lenders, we need to be the escrow officers, we need to be the appraisers. All of those individuals who are in this industry who have the ability to make decisions that might stop you from getting into a home, that might make it harder for you to get into a home, that might make it more costly for you to get into a home. We need to be exposed to all of those.
Definitely, definitely. It looks like Chris has joined us again. So with all of that being said, Agent Kee, are you seeing more initiatives? I mean, without a reparations package, because what you're describing to me is once something is law, the ideology sets in and says, this is law, so this is what we can do. So it really sounds like to me that this situation is not going to be solved unless it's mandated, unless there's policy and they have to do it. Otherwise, they're going to get away with as much as they can get away with. Are you seeing any types of policy changes that would help the Black community become homeowners?
You know, I don't want to minimize at all any of the work that's been done so far. But I will say the same government response that was used to put all of these practices in place to cause the discrimination, there needs to be an equally strong response to counter them. So we are not yet where we should be as it pertains to policy response, if that makes sense. We are not where we should be. There needs to be the same manner in which Jim Crow, redlining, blockbusting, there needs to be an equivalent to Jim Crow. There needs to be an equivalent response to blockbusting. There needs to be an equivalent response to redlining. It can't just be, the Housing Act of 1968. And so because of that, now things are all better, kumbaya. That's not going to get it. There needs to be money specifically thrown directly at individuals for being Black. And I'm laughing because that's the answer.
That's the answer. Everybody's trying to figure out what the answer is, and it's right in front of our faces.
Because there were policies and laws put in place that stopped the money from flowing. Now there need to be laws and policies put in place to keep the money flowing again, or to flow at once. I want to share something with you. I had a thought that came to me. So think about this. If we're talking about the GI Bill in 1948, so it was sweeping legislation to reward soldiers for fighting for their country, right? So when Congress passed the Fair Housing Act 20 years later, 20 years have gone by, and you've got this GI Bill that is clearly discriminating. Blacks are not able to take advantage of it. Not only were they not able to take advantage of it, but we were pushed into these neighborhoods that are now known as America's ghettos, right? So think about this. Homes back then, an $8,000 home bought with a GI Bill 20 years later was now selling for $100,000. Over those 20 years, whites amassed wealth through home ownership, while Blacks were legally pushed into segregated, low-income public housing communities. We need a very strong response in response to that specific moment.
So they need to keep the same energy they had in discrimination for liberation.
I don't see the policy response to that. I don't see.
Okay, all right. So at least we know what's needed and what we need to do. Let's take a quick look at another. Please, Chris.
Yeah, just to follow up on this real quick, and I'll make a couple quick comments. One, what Agent Kee here is describing is exactly 100% right in terms of what's needed in terms of a policy response, right? And I like the fact that she does this on a regular basis, in terms of pointing to specific policy harm, right, and specific examples. And it's important to make that kind of argument as often as we can. Point to specific harms, specific policy harms. It's not enough for us to just be general about racism and harm. No, we have to be very, very specific. I just read again Ira Katznelson's When Affirmative Action Was White. Just read it again, in the last few weeks, and that is, that's a policy history basically of, what happens when you create a Jim Crow GI Bill, or a Jim Crow New Deal, or a Jim Crow, Social Security Act, or a Jim Crow Fair Labor Standards Act, right? When there's, Jim Crow Taft-Hartley. I mean, when we're creating Jim Crow unions, right? When there's a Jim Crow military, right? Right? When there's a Jim Crow military, both for the First World War and the Second World War, and the wars in between, and the wars after, pretty much, right? Tying this stuff tying our case for reparative justice to specific policy harms is the way to go. So I want to co-sign that type of argument when we are doing this kind of work, because it's one of the most effective kinds of arguments that we have in our arsenal, right? When we can be very specific about very specific things. And the last point I'll make is that the housing and homeownership is super, super important for all the reasons that I'm sure you already talked about. One thing that I've tried to wrap my head around over the past few years is some newer that I had seen that looked at what happens when you make home ownership rates equal for Black other folks, and also what happens when you make what we call the returns to owning a home equal. Okay, there's a slight difference there, right? And we've had some really talented researchers be able to go out and measure, what we think the effects on what we target usually, which is the racial wealth gap, right? This is the best indicator of the effect of the past on the present, right? What's the best indicator for us of structural racism, et cetera, right? And the effects of the legacy effects of slavery, really, right? When we look, we see that if we were to, let's say, make home ownership rates equal for Black folks and white folks, right, we would have a measurable impact on the racial wealth gap, right? It would close some, right? Close all the way, right? When we make the returns to what you get from owning a home equal among Black folks and white folks, then we have an even bigger effect, according to the research, on the racial wealth gap. Okay, so that's one thing to say about homeownership, and the last thing to say about homeownership is homeownership is sort of like a super asset, if you ask me, or a home to me is the mortgage. I'm gonna mess up my finance class here, my real estate finance class, and not sure which is the asset, the mortgage or I'm not sure. Okay, so that's important, right? Because it's like a super asset, right? What do you need to get a home? What comes first, the home or the wealth? Okay. The way we traditionally look at it, it's home first, then you get wealth. Yes, if you're starting from zero. But if you're starting from not zero, in our case, we have a situation where wealth often now begets home ownership, right? What do you need to get a home? You need to have generally generational wealth passed down to you, okay? And that wealth shows itself in the help you got for the down payment, or maybe you got the whole house, okay? Maybe it's the family house, right? Maybe it's the cosigner and the credit and all that stuff, right? It's definitely the credit, right? A lot of times, but those are all functions of wealth. So I'm going to point to home ownership as a home as sort of a super asset that really there are things that go into creating or making you a homeowner that we sometimes aren't focusing on. And I think we want to focus on those more now, because the things that Agent Kee focuses on are the right things, right? What do you need to become a homeowner, right? And how can she help you get to that process, successfully? Let me shut up because this is not my show, but I just had to come and say that and listen.
Those are really good points, especially what comes first, the home ownership or the wealth. And in these days, it's definitely seems like the wealth has to come first through things like you said, like inheritance.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
So I love that he said that. And so if we think about what comes first, the home ownership I love that question. Let me tell you why. Because it is one of the items that I have on my list of things that we need to do to move the needle. Here it is. Home ownership concepts and benefits need to be taught early at the school level. Here's why. Because in households where you're living out of abundance, there are conversations about home ownership, investing, banking, retirement, insurance, and inheritance, right? In households where you're living paycheck to paycheck, we aren't having these conversations. The thought process for us is, how are the bills going to be paid? Which ones do you pay? And how do you budget for food for the rest of the month, right? So we need to collaborate with the schools to get involved in construction, redevelopment, and the home ownership during high school or earlier, so that when our kids get out, they view their neighborhoods as viable options in which to live, to return to live. They're not trying to leave their communities. Home ownership is immediately on their minds, and generational wealth building, the thought process of that can begin earlier. My daughter attended PS7 Elementary School, a charter school, which at some point people were trying to eliminate. And my daughter's class, in their class, they did an entire project on community development in elementary school, community development, where they were responsible for building a community, choosing what housing was going in, what services would go in there, what jobs they would have, who was going to run the city, who was going to be, all of that. Elementary school. This is how you get kids involved in thinking about home ownership, being good citizens, being an asset to your community, and thinking not only about being homeowners, but being business people, public servants and entrepreneurs and more. When you are living in scarcity, which is what Jim Crow, redlining, all of that did to the Black community by pushing us and segregating us, you live in scarcity. You don't have time to think about things like this. Only when you live in abundance, you're at a mental place in your life where you're not being traumatized, can you think about living beyond that. So I think it's more than just having the wealth first. We've got to be very intentional about pouring into our kids in an area that's already existing, which is school, to get this in their minds earlier.
I love that practical education that you can apply to,
How about that?
Yeah. Seems so simple. That would be too easy. That would be too easy. But no, these are the things that we need. They need to start thinking about it at a young age. So it's just, a natural part of, life. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So let's take a look at some of these charts and see where Black people are by race in home ownership. Well, actually, we're looking at homelessness. So estimated number of homeless people in the United States in 2020 by race. It actually looks like the white people have the most amount of homelessness, but when they have the most amount of people, so we're looking at 280,000 white people, African Americans, we're looking at, just over 228,000. So we're not that far behind them in homelessness numbers. But as far as our portion of the population, we're only 13% making up those numbers. Whereas, let me see if I can pull up another chart with some information. Whereas they're 76% of the population. So seeing those numbers, it looks like, we are really outpacing, disproportionate in the homelessness and the lack of home ownership is what's happening there.
That would be a marvelous graph if that was the wealth gap.
If that was the wealth graph, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so where is let's take a look at who is able to buy up all the land. America's biggest owner of farmland is now Bill Gates. Bill Gates, the fourth richest person in the world, and a self-described nerd who is known for his early programming skills rather than his love of the outdoors, has been quietly snatching up 242,000 acres of farmland across the U.S., enough to make him the top private farmland owner in America. After years of reports that he was purchasing agricultural land in places like Florida and Washington, the land report revealed that Gates, who has a net worth of nearly 121 billion, according to Forbes, has built up a massive farmland portfolio spanning 18 states. His largest holdings are in Louisiana, Arkansas, Nebraska. Additionally, he has stake in just over 25,000 acres of traditional land on the west side of Phoenix, Arizona, which is being developed as a suburb. Were you aware of that development, Kee? Agent Kee?
I was.
And what are your thoughts on that? What do you think he's buying up all this land for?
That is a billion-dollar question. I don't know Bill Gates personally. I wish I did, but he is genius in his own right, and he's a visionary. I'm certain that he has a plan. When you are financially able to do things.
Maybe his plan is for low-income housing instability.
I want to say real quick. Funny you mentioned Bill Gates because he and Melinda Gates just announced that they're getting divorced. So his net worth is going to be in half probably. Because
which is still a drop in the bucket, though. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Once 100 billion here, 100 billion there, right?
And I doubt that it stops any of his plans, but yeah.
No, not at all. No, they own that. Their foundation is, I think, the largest private foundation in the world. And Melinda does a lot of work too that's not really like talked about, but she's been very active. They're doing a lot of especially like nonprofit work too. I just mentioned that.
They do a ton of philanthropy. They have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have some very humanitarian things happening. We can only pray that people with this amount of money do what's right for humanity.
Money and now amount of land, that they do something benevolent with those resources, for sure.
Wouldn't it be ironic if he gave it back to Blacks? That would be the thing to do, Bill.
That would be the thing. Reparations,
because we all keep our receipts. We keep our receipts. I know every Black family knows the land they used to own.
For sure. Now, rates are at historic lows due to the coronavirus pandemic. Like I said, Sacramento is a really hot market as far as people purchasing up whatever's available on the market. I mean, have you seen a lot of Black people being able to take advantage of these historically low interest rates?
Yes, absolutely. The majority of the clients we serve are Black. And I'm proud of that. And that's intentional that I target us. And when I started talking about, coming into real estate and having a come to Jesus moment, it was that I was hit with that. These are my people. I need to serve them. We need to help them. We need to move the needle, increase the percentage of African-American Black home ownership, period. But more specifically here in Sacramento, I would love to be able to do it nationwide, but right now my goal is to do it right here in my own neighborhood in Sacramento. And so not only helping people, purchase and sell, but I am now also working on creating a mentorship program to bring new agents into the industry here locally, in particular African Americans, so that we can be more embedded within the system because as I stated earlier, we're the ones that help make those decisions. The real estate agents are very much a part of their clients' decisions. So if you imagine someone selling their home, if that person is white, chances are they're going to choose another white agent to list that home for them. And that white agent is going to have some input on which offer they should select. I've heard stories where sellers ask, what color is the buyer? Or, is that a Black last name? And this is an industry, right, that's supposed to be, there's laws and things in place now that says you can't discriminate. Well, you can't, it is so hard to pinpoint racial bias. When you're in the middle of a transaction, when you don't have any control over those offers, and once you send the offer over, it's out of your hands, literally. You don't know what's happening on the other side. So we need to get more Black and brown people in this industry so that we can have more control and increase the number. And because at the end of the day, there are people, everybody bias, implicit, they're there, unfortunately. And until we can do something about it legitimately, we need to do what we can internally.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic idea, the mentorship and getting our people to do this type of work. We have a question from the audience. Are there many first-time home buyers that you've seen? Are these first-time home buyers that you're dealing with? And how are they able to navigate all the credit restrictions? Have those laxed as well, or are those still pretty high standard?
So just last week, we got 3 buyers into escrow, and it was so exciting because 2 of them happened on the same day. And it is a numbers game. It's a relationship game. It's a strategy game. It is very tough. As a first-time home buyer, if you don't have a bank account that has an excessive amount of money, like the $40,000, $50,000 cash we were talking about that you can throw in there on top of it to increase the offer, then you've got to strengthen your offer in other areas. And in order for you to be able to do that, you have to have an agent who is very knowledgeable, very experienced. Right now in the market, experience matters. If you're a brand new agent, you need to be working under another experienced agent, or you're going to get burnt out, you're going to get discouraged, you're going to drop out. And we don't want you to drop out. We need you. So get under an experienced agent. If you're a buyer, you are working with an inexperienced agent, you need to be under an experienced agent. It takes a lot of experience in negotiating to get an offer accepted in this market, in addition to having relationships with other agents in the market. So yes, we are seeing first-time home buyers get their offers accepted using FHA loans and down payment assistance. Yeah, it's not happening as often as we'd like, but we are.
That's encouraging, one step at a time. And we'll take a look at this news here. This is an article from 2005, actually, but from J.P. Morgan Chase, an apology and $5 million in slavery reparations. So that was one of the early reparations initiatives. J.P. Morgan Chase, a company, recent apologies for its ties to slavery and corresponding $5 million scholarship program. It's set up for Black students with a step in the right direction for Tainted Corporation. But the nation's number 2 bank has a long way to go before it has fully paid its debt to African Americans, said one of the representative movements central to Deidre Farmer. Okay, that was back in 2005. If we fast forward to 2017, special investigation how America's biggest bank paid its fine for the 2008 mortgage crisis with phony mortgages. JP Morgan's share of the settlement was $5.3 billion, but only $1.1 billion had to be paid in cash, and the other $4.2 billion was to come from in the form of financial relief for homeowners in danger of losing their homes to foreclosure. The settlement called for JP Morgan to reduce the amounts owed, modify the loan terms, and take other steps to help distressed Americans keep their homes. A separate 2013 settlement against the bank for deceiving mortgage investors included another $4 billion in consumer relief. After JP Morgan's deceitful activities in the housing market helped trigger the 2008 financial crash that cost millions of Americans their jobs, homes, and life savings, punishment was in order. Among a vast array of misconduct, JP Morgan engaged in the routine use of robo-signing, which allowed banks to automatically sign hundreds, even thousands of foreclosure documents per day without verifying the contents. But in the United States, white-collar criminals rarely go to jail. Instead, they negotiate settlements. Okay? A nation investigation can now reveal how JP met part of its $8.2 billion settlement burden by using other people's money. Here's how the alleged scam worked. JP Morgan moved to forgive the mortgages of tens of thousands of homeowners. The feds, in return, credited these canceled loans against the penalties due under the 2012 and 2013 settlements. But here's the rub. In many instances, JP Morgan was forgiven loans that it no longer owned. And they called that a shell scheme. And that sounds like a lot what happened to my mortgage back in those early days. There was this promise of a modification. It was at a pretty reasonable rate. They sent over the modification contract in 2009. I started paying on it in 2010, and it went on and on and on into 2011, kept paying it. And then just out of the blue, out of nowhere, they up and bundled my loan and sold it to this third-party predatory lender, leaving me without any federal protections. So when you talk about FHA, are those the federal protections under HUD?
Same people.
Okay.
In
So that's what we're talking
2010,
about.
in 2010, they created the Hardest Hit Fund. And the Hardest Hit Fund was designed to offer some type of compensation or mortgage payment reinstatement plan to, I believe it was 18 states that were hit hardest by the fallout. For California, you may have heard, did you go through Keep Your Home California?
I did. I went through everything. And I'm sure, as you remember, it was stacks and on stacks on stacks on stacks of paperwork.
And through Keep Your Home California, where the government distributed the funds for the state of California through the Hardest Hit Fund. And it lasted for only so long. When it first started, there were only a handful of banks that actually participated. By the time the funds dried out, there were a number of banks that were participating. The only problem is that it wasn't strong enough. It didn't heal. It was only a Band-Aid. And for a lot of people, just like yourself, they're submitting documents, nothing's happening. They're being told that they're in a payment plan, only to be told that they've been denied because they've gotten into this plan, and it's like, but you told me to do this. And so I did this. And well, we don't have your paperwork. Well, I sent it 10 times, and so looking back on that, there are still people who are still devastated, who are still impacted, who are still trying to recover. So this Hardest Hit Fund, remember we earlier talked about what do they need to do to fix it? That was a policy that fizzled out. It was an answer, a response, or a solution that didn't work. And so they need to go back and try it again, because everybody who suffered from that fallout, again, we got the receipts. We know. I had to sell my house in a short sale because I had a crazy loan. Everybody that went through that should be compensated for the losses that occurred, because
Definitely.
Some people are just now recovering over 14 years later.
And the short sell, what I can never really understand with that is it's like, okay, if you're going to short sell my home to some random person, why can't I just, take you up on the short sale benefits and we'll
forgive
keep
the
it moving.
difference. Right. Right. If you're going to lose, if you're going to be willing to accept a loss, accept the loss with me so that I can keep my home, restructure my loan. What kind of sense does that make to punish me
Right.
for allowances that you made, that your finance institution made? So that is where the reparations come in. You need to compensate me for this because y'all allowed this. We were doing fine. In Sacramento, before the fallout, 50% of African Americans owned their home. 50%. One in every two people before the fallout. And then Bill Clinton came along and just wanted to sing kumbaya and implement these opportunities, these homeownership opportunities to increase Black home ownership. And that's what happened.
And there has
So
been,
people don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that because Bill Clinton is a sacred name in the Black community.
Yeah, well, I
want
to hear it. Yeah, and I want to see some action, as do, some activists. It looks like we're calling for reparations from Chase Bank in Chicago, and I'll just read some of these headlines here, calling because of the, discriminatory practices there. Then we come to an article here in 2020 where JP Morgan Chase commits $30 billion to tackle the racial wealth gap. So that sounds good, but who's really benefiting? How do you get to benefit from these programs?
Chris, did you have any input? Did you want to?
Yeah, I'm enjoying this conversation, and I do want to add though one thing. Let's deal with J.P. Morgan Chase for a minute, shall we? So one, cotton, cotton money, right? That's where the family gets its, originally from us, right? Gets it from us. We were part of its original property, right? We were a part of its original stock,
right?
As a company, and for them to, they can find $5 million in like their pockets, okay? Like that's the change that JP Morgan, that's not even like that's a fraction of a bonus that I think, is blank flying who I think is at Goldman, but I forget who the CEO of JP Morgan is today, but that's not even so one the 5 million is a joke, and then let's what a lot of research that I've seen talks about what we experienced during the 2000 late 2000 7 or 2007 2008 2009 2000 through 2011, the financial crisis, and then the recession that came after that. The rates of home ownership for Black folks went way down, right? But a lot of researchers that I've heard about talk about this call this a form of what we call reverse redlining, right? Right. So what we saw during our generation, okay, not our parents and our grandparents' generation, we have actually lived through a version of redlining. Okay, Kim, it sounds like what you described. Okay, all right, is part in practice of that, right? So again, and we've been making this point over and over again, in different ways. But the legacy of slavery itself lives with us to this day, right? And that's not, J.P. Morgan did a lot of other stuff during the crisis, and they weren't the only ones, but they were recipients of huge bailouts. They have been the beneficiaries of very low interest rates and cheap money since 2008. Okay. All right. So they are benefiting, from all of these so-called moves to make atonement, or to pay penalty. I mean, it's a joke to get a $5 billion penalty and have to pay $1 billion in cash. That's a joke. That also they could find underneath the couch at J.P. Morgan. Okay, just because of how much money that one firm does more business than I think all Black-owned businesses, like or Black-owned banks combined. Okay, that one investment bank. Okay, that one does more business, holds more assets probably on hand than all Black-owned banks combined. Check me on that. So they are part of what I think is gonna have to part of the who I think are gonna be paying in terms of reparations. But ultimately, right, our focus is on the federal government, and I think the federal government should and we can help with some of these ideas about how to do this. But I think the federal government should also present an invoice to some of these huge corporations, right? Also, and add it to the bill, and let's move forward with the actual reparations, payouts, right? That take account of the contributions like JP. Last thing I'll say is this: what these are things that the Reparations Commission and most likely the Reparations Commission legislation that will move forward this year will have to deal with. These are questions for the state task force, which starts in 3 weeks. We'll have to deal with, right? And it's these questions of how do you redress these specific harms, right? Knowing that one here in California, for example, we have an issue where we have, it's illegal to do anything specifically for one specific racial group of people, right? It's called Prop 209. It was called Prop 16, or the effort to change that was called Prop 16 last year, right? But it's illegal for us right now. We were saying, to have a Black agenda is illegal right now, or at least an exclusively Black agenda, because of Prop 209. And so I think one of the recommendations that I hope this reparations task force comes to is a way to get through and finally break down Prop 209, at least as it concerns Black folks. If we have to, right, at least as it concerns Black folks. But that's a major barrier, right? And that's something to also keep in our minds here. These are the things that this commissions are going to have to figure out. And for those who are listening and watching right now, think about the ideas that you're hearing and that you have heard over the last hour or so. Think ideas about what reparations looks like to you. Be ready to engage with our team and also with this reparations commission itself, so that your feedback and your ideas and the community's voice is actually heard during these task force hearings and conversations, because we really do, I think the real solutions come from people like Agent Kee, come from people like you, Kim, come from people like myself, come from people who are, maybe not professionals or career at this, but
boots on the ground,
who are boots on the ground, Black folks, everyday regular Black folks that care about their people, right? And as simple as that.
To Chris's point, I just want to point out that JP Morgan's first quarter earnings, this is after they paid the bills, $14.3 billion.
In 3 months.
With a B.
In 3 months.
After the bills is paid.
After they paid their bills in 3 months. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, come on. They're very connected to the government, obviously, right? And they spend millions of dollars on government, lawyers and government relations people and, offices in Washington, right? And they're able to protect their wealth, very well. But yeah, thanks for bringing those stats. Appreciate.
Yeah, and this is not a matter of taking from the rich to give to the poor. As Chris stated earlier, we are pointing out specific moments on the historical timeline of America where it was legal to use race to discriminate to keep Black people down and poor. And you must remember that. And the way to rectify that is to address that directly head on. Well, if we discriminated because they were Black, we now need to correct it because they are Black. The same energy in which it happened to us, the only way to correct it is to reverse what happened. You can't say, oh, well, now there are laws in place where we can't discriminate. Well, then how do you fix that? How do you fix that? You can't not address the discrimination. You can't.
One thing they'll try to key, right, in response to that, which is the one of the strongest arguments we have, right? That's the argument you just made right there is one of the strongest arguments we have. It's an argument that Dr. King made, right? When he said, I think it was in Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. That was his last book, right? Where he says something like, America has done something special against the Negro for 350 years. Now America must do something special for the Negro. Okay, right? That's exactly what you just said. Okay, that's exactly what he said, right? And so what you hear in response is, well, we need to do these sort of class-based, everybody, wins, all, lift all hand and lift every boat. I'm about to lift every boat and vote and sing. That's something mixing two that don't go together. But in short, class policies don't fix race problems. Okay, class policies don't fix race problems. In fact, they can make them worse. Okay, if you look at things like the Jim Crow New Deal. Okay, and I'm going to keep referring to it as the Jim Crow New Deal because that's what it was. Okay, and I may be annoying some of our friends on the Democratic left here, right? Because it's a very popular thing to talk about the New Deal and to talk about, how progressive FDR was, right? And we need policy like the New Deal now, right? That's sort of a lot of what we hear. If you don't do it right, and if you try to do a class-based policy that, and try to fix, or at least, think you can fix a race problem, you get what you got, right? Which is Black folks doing worse, okay, and white folks doing better, okay. The gap, right, between the two grows, right. Black folks may see some improvements marginally, very slow growth, very slow progress, but the gap between us and the rest of us goes up faster, so fast it makes your head spin, right. That's what we saw right after. That's why Lyndon Johnson was asking this question when he went to Howard to talk about affirmative action, right, in the early 60s. It's why he said, listen, why is it that we just had a World War II and we had the most expansion and biggest growth of this country in the 50s and late 40s and 50s that we've ever seen. We had the biggest economic expansion after the war. America is on top. Why is it that during this time of American expansion, Black folks is going in the opposite direction? He was saying this in the 60s.
Right.
Okay. Right.
Because these policies were written not to lift all of America out of the Depression, but white America out of the Depression. And that's how it's explained in the history books. That's how we were taught it. And we didn't refute it in school when we were children. Our parents didn't refute it unless Black history was being taught in our homes. We were learning white history in the schools. And so white history said that FDR propelled America out of the Great Depression. But that didn't apply to, so if we're talking about Social Security, not only was the GI Bill a flop for African Americans, as we talked about earlier, but two key professions that would have improved equity in America for Blacks was domestic and farm workers, but they were excluded from receiving the Social Security benefits. 60%, that impacted us economically as well during that time. But we don't get that in the history book. We get the other side of the story that says, oh, this was a wonderful thing for America. It propelled us out of the Great Depression. Not all of us. Not all of us.
Make that point even stronger here, right? It's because of the fact that they were going to exclude black folks. That's why white folks were able to do the new deal and get the New Deal. Okay, this is
Right.
in Katz Nelson's book. This he talks about this, for about a whole chapter. This, and he talks about the politics of the Southern Democrats and the Northern Democrats and the Southern Republicans and Northern Republicans and the deals they were cutting to this legislation passed, and the deals FDR was cutting to get the New Deal. And it's not just one thing, right? The New Deal legislation spans several years, and even and the response to the New Deal legislation. Well, I mean, you could probably argue it's still going on, but some of the response to the New Deal legislation, has goes into the 40s and 50s, right? So it's not just one thing we're talking about here, but it was a part of the deal. It's white folk going to get all of this, but in order for you to get it, we got to cut out the black folks. Deal,
Right.
deal. Okay.
Right.
This was the progressives and the conservatives and the liberals. And this was all parts of the right. This is all part. This was a grand bargain, right? It's and wherever we can, and if there's any benefits going to black folks, we got to make sure that it's way less than what's going to white folks. And by the way, we got to give the state local control over how the money gets spent, so that way we guarantee it's going to be Jim Crow no matter what, right? And this is again, and I don't want to belabor the point here, but it's important to talk about these specific harms and then talk about why these specific harms need to be redressed, right? And also, if you have ideas about how they can, how can you fix this? Yeah, we want to hear those ideas too, right? But making the specific connection is really, really important.
Right. And so it's really important for us Blacks to understand and know this history, because as Chris is stating, we have to be able to point back to exactly what happened. And we can't, when someone talks about reparations and they get mad about it, and if you're Black and you see someone getting mad about it, you need to know how to defend what's getting ready to be placed in front of you. That it's coming. It's the conversations are beyond being had. Legislation is in the making. It's coming. And so you want to be able to defend properly, succinctly, logically, without getting angry. We're very passionate about it, and so we get passionate about it as we talk about it. But we're passionate about it because we're living in the moment. We see it, we can taste it, we know it's coming. And we've got this information, this historical data in our minds. We know what happened. You all need to make yourselves aware of it too. The information is so readily available. I tell you, I told several people many times, the cell phone needs to be on the front cover of Time magazine as the Black person's best friend for all kinds of reasons. Videotaping, access to wealth building, information, the cell phone, the invention of the cell phone has been a technological savior for the Black community. And so there's nothing that's out of our reach if you have access to the internet. The history of what we're talking about, it's there. If you're trying to build financial literacy, the information is there. If you need to record cops going left, it's there. I feel like I'm on the pedestal. Let me step down.
We definitely need to keep that same energy for uplift as they had for tearing us down. But let's talk about what some recommendations can look for, like for the AB 3121 task force that will be seated next month. I mean, for me, just minimum that all loans that Black people hold should be under that FHA, that federal protection. So when something goes on, like the housing bust in 2008 or the COVID pandemic current happening now, that we have those federal protections. They have the forbearance for homeowners. They're able to put off paying their bills. That was one protection that they received during the pandemic. And then with these predatory lenders, it was just up to their discretion. So I know that I was denied forbearance opportunities with my current lender because it's not federally protected. So that would be one recommendation that I would put forward for sure. What do you think about that?
So I would first like to remind everyone listening that reparations are not new. There's been a history of reparations rewarded to other ethnicities in the United States. Native Americans, they've received land and billions of dollars for various benefits and programs for being forced off their land.
And they got a big carve out in the COVID relief package as well.
And it's well known. You can travel somewhere and you can see signs that say you are on native land. Right now in Elk Grove, the huge casino resort that's being built, Native American land. They can do that. They've overcome so many judicial obstacles because they are on Native American land that was given to them. So this is not something new. For Japanese Americans, they were awarded $1.5 billion to those who were interned during World War II. $1.5 billion during World War II. That was a lot of money back then. Today, who knows how much that might be. There were the Jews were awarded reparations for the Holocaust. So asking for reparations for Blacks is just long overdue. It's been our turn for a long time, and that turn is coming up. So when we talk about what do Blacks deserve for reparations, if you are Black, don't feel like you are not deserving of this. The moment that you're in right now in this space and time is a result of what happened to our ancestors, whatever position you're in. If you're in a good position as an African American, I know you fought for that. That didn't just get handed to you. You had to put in some extra work to get to where you are. And if you're not in a good financial position, it's because of where we've come from. It's because of the position that we've put in. It's because of the opportunities that we were not allowed to have. And so as we talk about, well, what types of things should be done? From the housing perspective, a strong government response to me looks like rezoning. A lot of the commercial areas right now that are sitting looking zombified, make them single family. People always say, oh, it's so hard to rezone. No, it's not. Get somebody in the position who is in the position of authority and get to rezoning. God ain't making no more land. And we have a huge amount of land in the Sacramento area. I believe a majority of it is zoned for residential. But we can do what we want to do when we want to do it. Sacramento is working on rezoning single family right now to multifamily for the purpose of what? Building affordable housing. But what is affordable housing again? Renting. Don't fall for the okie doke. We need to build affordable home ownership. The other thing that needs to be offered are incentives to developers and organizations who are looking to build affordable, innovative, eco-friendly home ownership opportunities, again, with sustainable technology. We need to focus on revitalizing our communities that we've been pushed into before they get gentrified, the ones that have been redlined, and turn them into owner-occupied, self-sustaining, affordable, greener communities. Why am I emphasizing this eco-friendly greener? Because that's the trend. That's where we're heading. That's where housing is heading. They are already working from an architectural standpoint on using materials that fall into those categories. So when we build homes in our communities, we need to use the same materials, the same process, if not better. We need to provide down payment grants for Blacks. And I'm kind of hesitating as I'm walking in that direction because I talked about it earlier with Kim before the show started.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what's out there right now? You said 22,000 in down payment grants.
The Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency has a $22,000 grant. It is income-based and family size based. So a lot of people won't qualify, but it's out there. If you go to SHRA's website, shra.org, there's more information about it. It is a grant that actually has existed for quite a while in the Bay Area. And the current CEO, Tyrone Williams at Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency, had the thought to, hey, bring it here. It's been sitting there all this time. And it took to get a person like us in a position of authority to say, hey, why aren't we doing this? And to bring it here. My only hesitancy with these down payment assist with anybody, whether it's Chase or SHRA, anybody throwing money at the housing community to the most vulnerable right now, is that there is a huge possibility that homes are being sold more than what they should be worth, and that there's going to come a time, a day of reckoning, where things are going to have to balance back out and the prices of housing is going to drop. And so I'm very concerned that anyone buying a home right now might be getting into it upside down. And if they're not able to sustain themselves in the event there's some type of an economic downturn, that they might lose their home.
And that's why I think the federal protections would, like I said, would be the least that they can offer, because at least when something happens, you have that federal protection. You don't have these predatory lenders breathing down your neck, not wanting to give you the same benefits that the federal government is giving. So I definitely think that. What about zero interest rate loans?
Well, here's the other thing too that I wanted to add. For current homeowners, I think under reparations, two things should happen. For Black homeowners who currently hold a mortgage, their loan should be forgiven. That should happen. Any balance owed on their mortgage should just be simply wiped out. The other thing that should happen, because it's a huge hindrance for individuals who are trying to buy a home, is student loan. I know Biden is already working on it, and I'm just hopeful that that really occurs, or that it occurs under reparations, where student loans, student loan debt, and this is not new to you or Chris. They won't give an 18-year-old a business loan, right? Where you have an entrepreneurial spirit and you got this great idea, you're getting ready to run off and try to build this empire. Even if you have a business plan, you're not getting that business loan. But they will give you $100,000 student loan to an 18-year-old and straddle you with debt for the remainder of your life. They'll give it to you year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4. And the majority of individuals who graduate college, if they graduate, because there are a number of people who don't graduate who are still straddled with debt. And if you graduate, aren't working in the field in which they graduated in, or if they are working in the field, they're so busy paying off their debt, they've got to pay off that they don't even recognize any of the reward for going to school to get the job that they have.
It almost seems like another trick bag. They told us this is what you need to do. You need to go to school. You get the better job. You get the higher incomes, and that just happened.
We've got to snap out of it. And we are so, the brain is so accustomed to what it's normally accustomed to. It it's hard for people to snap out of it because we think this is how it's supposed to be. But it's like, well, but look at the numbers. Look at our neighborhoods. Look at Black neighborhoods. If Black leadership is being there are some players who are representing our communities where the government and big business is throwing money at these organizations who are there, community-based organizations who are there to help Black communities, millions of dollars every year, but our communities aren't changing. The needles aren't moving on the numbers on the wealth income gap, on home ownership, none of that. Those players need to be removed. I don't know if I should have said that, but
no, and I'm right there with you on the home ownership and the, just forgive it. Just forgive the home ownership. It feels like I've paid it off anyways, because I've been in this, interest only loan, since the beginning. I never see a dip in principal. So when will I ever start to see a dip in principal? Because there's always going to be interest to pay on a hundreds of thousands of dollar loan.
I had an elderly lady reach out to me last year and it broke my heart. She wanted to sell her home because she had a medical condition. She was in her late 70s. She wanted to move back to a state to live with her sister. She was excited about selling her home. When we pulled the mortgage statement so that I could run the numbers to see what she was going to net, because I initially ran the numbers based on how long she told me she owned the home, and okay, well, you should have this balance that you owe. For 20 years, almost 20 years, she had been paying on an interest-only loan, not paying down the principal at all. And nobody, her loan had been transferred twice. Nobody bothered to reach out to her and say, hey, let's modify, this ain't going nowhere. These companies are sitting back, reaping the benefits of her paying on the interest and not caring at all about the end result. This elderly lady, a home is supposed to be an asset, a wealth building tool. You're in business just to get the business and not to help the consumer with the end result.
It's criminal. And what you said about these bad actors needing to get rid of them, these predatory lenders, I mean, they got to go. I mean, everything just needs to be under FHA at this point, because I mean, it's just criminal. It's criminal the way that they're acting. That's why I don't even feel bad, because it's like, okay, well, it's interest anyways. You could live without the interest. I mean, on this forbearance, I was asking for a little forbearance forgiveness, and it's like, no, we can't do it. And it's like, it's only interest anyway. I mean, it ain't no skin off your back. So
but it's what they're in business for. That's
so they've definitely got to go. Well, I know that we are reaching up on time here. So just to recap, we've come up with some ideas that we can, present as recommendations to the reparations task force. You say development incentives, incentivize these developers to be able to build affordable homeowner houses, not just
home ownership opportunities.
Yeah, rezoning. You said that that's a avenue that can be taken. The green, using the green programs to get everything up to par. We had a comment in here from LA. Kee Mathews is great. I agree. The green component is key. In LA, the green bid in Black neighborhoods are getting denied. So in 50 years, our communities will remain behind. So we need to get up to date in that. And that kind of goes to environmental the environmental, what do they call it, where, certain neighborhoods are just environmentally worse than other neighborhoods.
Absolutely. When they pushed us off into these segregated neighborhoods, if you look at the Black communities on a map, they're in the industrial zones. That's why right now the cannabis industry, the Blacks who are trying to get into that space are fighting right here locally, because now the council people in those areas want to say, hey, there's too many of these cannabis shops coming up in our neighborhoods right at the time when Blacks are getting ready to jump in, are being allowed to jump in and make their mark with storefronts. Now they want to put a halt or a moratorium on these companies coming in, because now they want to acknowledge, oh, well, there's too many of them coming into these neighborhoods. Where are these neighborhoods located? In the industrial areas. Where can you place cannabis shops? Only in industrial areas. Coincidence? I think not. I think not.
Yeah. Since you mentioned cannabis, I'm a big proponent of that as a recommendation as well. We should get the cannabis industry like the Indians have the casino industry. I mean, just hand it over.
If we're doing tit for tat, you lock the majority of us up because we sold it. Now that it's legal, we don't get to sell it. That makes sense.
That's another recommendation. So I'm just jotting these recommendations down. You mentioned down payment grant, even though you said you'd be weary of that one. You don't want to get people in deeper trouble.
Yeah, just on when it's disseminated. I think there needs to be careful consideration of the financial environment, the financial housing environment, when they start pouring money into our communities. When they start pouring, well, just like back in 2004 with the different loan types, you know, those were viewed as opportunities for housing to the numbers to increase for African Americans, but they were subpar loans. They were substandard. They were very risky. And a lot of people knew going in what they were, but still they were allowed to happen. So I think that there are some people sitting back right now looking at the bigger picture down the road, and they see what's coming. And so me on the inside looking at the bigger picture, we need to be very careful to not push the purchasing opportunity at this time within these next. Those of us who can need to go in understanding you'd better be able to financially recover in the event there's some type of economic downturn. Just make sure you understand that getting into the market right now is super risky, the housing market, and you got to be strong financially.
Okay. And then the loan forgiveness, you know, my personal favorite is let's just wipe the slate clean, and you know, we'll continue from there. But then also I'm thinking, like, you know, because Black people disproportionately have bad credit ratings, maybe some kind of program to boost your credit rating if this is what we're going to be judged by, and we've been, you know, pushed into these situations where our credit's been ruined, barely recovering from the 2008 downturn, like you said. Maybe that needs to be wiped clear too, or, you know.
So the two biggest things that hinder us from home ownership are the down payment and the credit. And so there definitely need to be better financial counseling for new homeowners through financial literacy courses. But those things need to take place. I don't think they can be government mandated as much as they need to be implemented on a local level. It almost needs to be a PSA, financial literacy. And that's why I say it goes back to putting that, it's got to become a mindset. Financial literacy has never been a mindset for us before because we've lived culturally in scarcity. So you can't think about abundance. You can't think about investing. You can't think about home ownership. You can't think beyond living paycheck to paycheck when you're living in scarcity because you're just trying to survive. And so now that a lot of us have gotten out of survival mode, it's up to us to come back to those who are in survival mode and implement these financial literacy courses. Sacramento, there are two that I always promote. I'm sure there are more out there, but the Greater Sacramento Financial Literacy Group, that's out of Del Paso Heights. And now I was attending that group I think I started 2 years ago. There were like 40 people in. Now, because of COVID, there's almost 200 people in the group because they've moved to Zoom. And then there's the Black Wealth Matters group. And they're based out of off of Fruit Ridge Road, but they too have gone to Zoom, and the classes have grown. And so you can find both of those groups on Facebook, Greater Sacramento Financial Literacy Group and Black Wealth Matters. Black Wealth Matters is under Michael Blair. Greater Sacramento Financial Literacy Group is under Jay King. And they both do a wonderful job with teams that help them put together this information to teach financial literacy. They teach investing in stocks and options and cryptocurrency, which is huge right now. Michael Blair has an entire series where he goes from week to week, exchanging through home ownership, insurance, wills and trusts, investing. So that's on us as a community to promote that narrative. Okay. But definitely.
Wonderful ideas. Mm-hmm. Yes. So we're at the end of our time here. Chris, did you have any final thoughts before we let Miss Kee get on with her evening?
Well, thanks to you both. It's been a great conversation. I've been sitting and listening and just really enjoying the discussion. One last, I guess would be, really to let's continue and keep thinking about what reparations looks like to us and makes sense to us with respect to the state task force, right? Focus on what the state can do, right? As we also think about what the federal can do, right? It's our position generally that really the blame and the responsibility for our reparations comes, and the bill goes to the federal government, right? But there's a lot that states can do, I think, and a lot of good positive pressure, that I think states can add to this fight for federal reparations, and I think our state task force is going to do that. In terms of housing, it's such a very important piece of this puzzle, right? And what I was saying earlier about housing being a super asset is important when you think about ideas and proposals. And what I said earlier about the racial wealth gap being one of the targets, it's all important too, right? If I were trying to craft up or think up some sort of reparations, component, that deals with housing, obviously I was bringing folks like others, right? And others, right? Bringing, the subject matter experts, right? But from just a policy perspective, I'm thinking about some goals and some targets, right? And what are we trying to accomplish here, right? What's the outcome that we want to see in the real world, right? And then how do we get there based on what we can do with this legislation, right? I think Agent Kee gave us some great recommendations, right? And I'm glad you're taking notes, Kim. Obviously, this is live, so we can just go back. But definitely, Agent Kee, we definitely want to invite you to be a part of helping us help the task force make good proposals. All right, that's the next phase in our fight. At least as a team of folks here at the state level dedicated to reparations advocacy work. Right, that's our next fight, and so we need folks like you, who have ideas about housing. I do want to point out that we think deeply about and creatively about how we tackle this problem, and not limit ourselves to either what's going on now, what's already been done, or or what we think can't happen, or they won't do this, or no, let's think about what we want.
I think outside the box. I am thinking outside the box. We've got to build, and we've got to think about constructing a new world.
Right. This is the
a world that works.
This reparations effort is a transformational effort. Right. This is about transformational change. It's not about reform, and reform is good where we can do it, but this is about transformation. Okay. You know, take for example this let's housing, right? This super asset, right? Kim, you are really going down the right road when you talked about what are the components of making a homeowner, right? And then Agent Key said, you know, it's largely for us, it's credit and down payment, right? Well, what are the things that make you have a down payment? And have a down payment that's competitive, okay, with the white folks who have down
Well,
payments.
and what is the purpose of the down payment? Because
Right.
maybe we get rid of that.
Right. What is the purpose of it? Or maybe we have to rethink how we look at black folks' credit when it comes to housing, right? Maybe for black folks, you know, we have to have a certain kind of special way to rate our credit, right? You know, and just last thing I'll say, I promise I'll shut up. We do have to. What we're talking about stuff that's targeted specifically for black folks. Okay.
Right.
That is technically illegal in the state of California because of Prop 209 and because of the failure of Prop 16. Right. If I go to city council, if I go to the state and I have a policy specifically for black folks, right. You know, in most cases, that's illegal. Okay. And so really, you know, there's a battle that this task force is going to have to do, kinds of proposals that they can make, you know, in a you know, a world where there is no Prop 209 versus a world where there is, which is this world, are very, very different. And this task force is going to have to, I think, be really creative and really challenge itself, right? Not to think inside of the 209 box,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So let me stop there and just thank y'all for this great conversation.
I appreciate that. I've never been to allow the gatekeeper to stop me. And I think God built me this way on purpose for a moment just like this. So, you know, as it pertains to Prop 209 or anything else that they want to put in front of us, it's just a matter of dismantling it. And we just go to work on dismantling it. And I purposely don't I remove naysayers from within my circle. I don't affiliate with folks who can't think outside the box, who don't have my same energy, because if God places it on my heart to do something, it's done. It's as good as done. It's just a matter of finding the yeses and making it happen. So I'm on board.
With that, thank you so much, Key. We are definitely here at ETM Media going to be watching and tracking what happens with the AB 3121 Reparations Task Force here in California, because we do want this to be a transparent experience and get the information out, and we do want community engagement on this. So please, let's keep this energy going. Like V says, keep the energy going. Night, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.